Veronica Bolton-Smith. I'm the CEO of the Connect Africa Network, working with investors and connecting them to investments in Africa. And I'm delighted to be here today. So let me start by saying that there is no denying that the emergence of hydrogen as an alternative energy solution is an exciting one. Many countries around the world are racing to understand how best to harness this energy in a safe and sustainable and reliable way for industrial and domestic use. Hydrogen as an energy carrier will play an important role in the decarbonisation of multiple industries. However, partnerships are key between politicians, businesses and individuals, and ensuring a successful transition to greener energy. Green hydrogen presents exciting opportunities due to the fact that it relies on renewable energy, e.g. solar and wind, and blue hydrogen relies on carbon capture from methane gas. Although exciting, we still need to understand what the energy requirements will be to essentially split the hydrogen from the rest of the elements. This could be a challenge in continents such as Africa, who are still exploring large capacity renewable use for industry. It is clear that there are huge advantages and challenges that lie ahead, namely the setting up of robust infrastructure and logistics to transport a highly explosive gas. In terms of positive developments, the UK is developing the world's first hydrogen village, a community completely powered by hydrogen gas in the north of England. This will serve as a prototype for a hydrogen town that they hope to complete at the mid of the decade. Companies also such as JCB have invested to the tune of £100 million a year of their own financing to research and develop prototype heavy industry vehicles for the industrial sector using hydrogen. However, there is much that needs to be done before we start to see this source of energy deployed to the industrial sector and within homes. The role of the governments in drafting robust policy frameworks and research and development financing and to develop financing so that we can better understand this burgeoning hydrogen space. And to help us explore this fascinating and exciting space, I am joined by my distinguished panelists who hail from Aqua Power, IDC and MENA Hydrogen Alliance. I'll hand over now to Frank to introduce himself and then pass it down. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that introduction. My name is Frank Wouters. I do a number of things, among which I am chairing the MENA Hydrogen Alliance. If I look at my professional career for 30 years, I've been now part of what we call the energy transition, which is basically going away from digging for energy underground, which is what we've been doing for centuries, to opening up to the elements, the sun, the wind, etc. But now we have to go back and dig, maybe not for oil, but we have to dig for minerals. And that is part of the exciting journey that we're also here today to better understand how minerals and critical minerals are part of that supply chain going forward.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks. I'm Joanne Bate. I'm the Chief Operations Officer of the Industrial Development Corporation of South Africa. And I've been the chairperson of the Green Hydrogen Panel in South Africa, where we formulated, together with government, industry, and government and private sector, a green hydrogen commercialization strategy for the country that was approved by Cabinet last year. And we're now moving into the implementation of the Green Hydrogen Plan. And as Frank said, you can't think about green hydrogen without thinking about the critical minerals necessary to enable the deployment of green hydrogen. And we've developed a sustainable, or future minerals and sustainable minerals plan as well, which the IDC is actively implementing. Both green hydrogen and critical minerals are two of the big bets of the country investment strategy.
Thanks, Joanne.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Driss Barajo. I head the Green Hydrogen Development Team at Aqua Power. So at Aqua Power, we are originally a power and water company, and we've grown fairly fast and on the renewables. So today we have roughly 24 gigawatts of renewable power capacity globally. And through that transition and that journey where we saw really prices for renewable power crashing down, this is where the opportunity for green hydrogen started materializing for us. And so we started our journey in 2019. Very quickly, we were able to turn that into an actual project, which is called the NEOM Green Hydrogen Project. We're doing together as a joint venture with NEOM and Air Products. So this project will produce around 1.2 million tons of green ammonia starting from 2027, and we are lucky that this project is already under construction. And of course, we have great ambitions to grow further in this business. And of course, I mean, for us, I mean, this is we're in a very being here today is very significant for us because, I mean, as mentioned, of course, green metals and mining will be definitely supporting the green energy transition. But at the same time, we believe that through green power and green hydrogen, we will be definitely contributing to effectively decarbonizing and making this sector as well more sustainable, because it is definitely part of the hard-to-abate sectors, and where we see really green power and green hydrogen making a great contribution to that. So.
Thanks, Driss. Great. Well, I think I'll start off by asking you, Frank. So how are the MENA countries and institutions, which are historically among the largest producers of oil and gas, supporting the development of both blue and green hydrogen as part of the broader country and regional energy transitions? And what do you see as the role of the public versus private sector?
Yeah, so if I look at MENA, you mentioned that obviously, you know, we're here in Saudi Arabia, one of the larger oil producers in the world and gas, etc. But that is not all of MENA. I mean, MENA also has countries that are typical buyers of hydrocarbons, of energy. But what they have in common is that they're all blessed with a number of things that you know, are crucial for the green economy. First of all, they have land available, but most importantly, the renewable energy resource. There's great, in many places, great combination of solar and wind. Particularly solar is obviously abundant. Now, if you then combine that, let's say, natural resource, natural capacity with intellectual and physical infrastructure that's available, for example, in Saudi, but the same in Oman, in United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, etc., that you have built, you know, over the decades for hydrocarbons, then you have, of course, a head start. First of all, you have very low-cost renewable energy. The lowest-cost renewable energy projects have been built, for example, by our friends from ACWA Power in this region. And then you add the fact that you already know how to handle liquids and gases and pressurize them, etc. You have that capacity. So that makes it, you know, a very natural thing to go beyond hydrocarbons and look at green molecules. For the importers, you know, of course, it offers a fantastic opportunity to be less dependent on imports. If I think of Morocco, which is also part of the MENA Hydrogen Alliance, they're currently buying about 2 million tons of ammonia every year, you know, to turn their phosphate into fertilizer. And that is something that, you know, instead of buying that, you can actually build, you know, a capacity to tap into the renewable energy resource that you have in Morocco, make your own ammonia, make green ammonia, and turn it into, you know, a green product that's fit for the future. So you have a lot more value creation within the country. So we're seeing those not just on the hydrocarbon producing countries, but also in the other countries. There's a massive opportunity for industrialization, economic development, you know, jobs, all the benefits that come with this. Now, if you then look at, okay, what are we going to do with this green energy, whether it's an electron or a molecule, this is actually the biggest promise. You know, what we've seen in the last couple of 100 years is wherever you have cheap and available energy, you have economic development. So this is going to shift away from, let's say, the traditional coal areas or oil and gas areas to places that are, again, you know, blessed with, you know, the new resource. We already see that happening. So we'll see a change in the future in geopolitics of energy. There's going to be different dependencies, but I think the bottom line is that we will probably have more options. So in that sense, you will never be completely energy independent. Some people dream about that now. With renewable energy, we can be independent. That is not going to happen because you have substantial cost differences. If you have cost differences, you have trade. That is going to happen irrespective of whether you could potentially and theoretically be energy independent. You won't be because it's just cheaper to buy from other places. And again, that is going to change the world as we know it. And I think it's super exciting. We haven't gotten all the answers, but it's certainly something that we're looking at as a MENA Hydrogen Alliance. Like, how is that going to change? What can we do to help countries and organizations in being part of that change and getting the most out of it?
Thanks. And lots there to kind of unpack, but I think one of the things that stands out to me is this issue of value chain addition being really critical to lots of countries and continents, particularly after COVID. So yeah, looking at that and also the cost implications of looking into these various areas. Thank you. I'll ask the next question now to Dries. What challenges do project developers and the private sector face in delivering competitive and bankable green hydrogen projects?
Thanks. So before starting with challenges, maybe it would be good to start with opportunities, because that to turn it a little bit more of a positive side. I think that if we look at Saudi Arabia on its own, I mean, Saudi Arabia receives enough solar energy to produce the amount of hydrogen that is expected to be consumed by the entire world in 2050 several times over. So I think that just that simple realization, and Saudi Arabia is a small part of the global map. I think just from that perspective, I think it should bring to our attention that we should be moving actually no longer from a world of energy scarcity, but rather to move to a world of effectively energy abundance. So yes, today it may look more expensive, but we will be heading towards a world where actually we have enough energy to power effectively our industry and our growth at a lower cost and in a sustainable manner. Okay. Now, of course, there are challenges today in order to get us on that journey where there is of energy abundance. And we look at developing such a project of green hydrogen that involves, first of all, a lot of land. And when we say that, of course, we need to put effectively millions of solar panels and thousands of wind turbines over like large plots of land in order to produce large-scale green hydrogen. And the simple mobilization of land, effectively, and we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of square kilometers, even on a single project, that effectively creates a challenge simply in the interaction with the governments and the stakeholders and the local communities as well. We're having such a big footprint, and that effectively managing that land mobilization and the consequences associated with that is definitely a challenge, okay? And the interaction with government, of course, is very important. I mean, we are looking to operate in mostly in geographical areas where governments tend to own the land, okay? In other parts of the world, where it's a bit more scattered, the challenge is even bigger because there is a need to aggregate effectively that land to get to the scale required. The second aspect is that why we're talking about such a large amount of land is that because the projects, in order to be relevant and competitive, needs to be scalable, and they need to be as large as possible in order to be competitive and deliver a cheap molecule at the end. And scalability, of course, brings challenges. Of course, it's a lot of money involved, but that may be a secondary issue. There is as well the implementation of such large projects in terms of mobilizing supply chain, mobilizing construction machinery. That's something that we don't really think about, but in Saudi Arabia we are blessed. When we were doing our NEOM green hydrogen project, we did not even think whether there was enough construction machinery. It's all available effectively at the fence. If you go in other places which have great renewable potentials, Mauritania, Namibia, where is that supply chain? So that has to be built, that has to be developed. It's not impossible, but it's going to take time, it's going to take efforts and resources to get there. Then the next aspect that we would see is, and maybe something that sometimes we don't really think about, is human resources, human capital. Developing such projects and building them effectively takes a lot of talent and a lot of qualified people. During the development stage, of course, because in order to frame the projects, structure them, develop, finance them, but as well during the construction. To give you an idea, at peak in our NEOM Green Hydrogen project, we're talking about roughly 15,000 to 20,000 people mobilized on site. Okay. That is quite an important feature, and this is not like and that's just 200,000 tons of hydrogen. That's a drop in the big ocean we're trying to build altogether. Okay. The other aspect is infrastructure. These green hydrogen projects come with a lot of infrastructure, whether it's to move power, to move water, to store hydrogen, or to move hydrogen. So, and that infrastructure tends to be pretty capex intensive. And for a project to sustain on its own the entire infrastructure needs effectively and in order to bring to make the project bankable. That tends to be challenging, and this is where we see potentially a role for the government in order to organize that infrastructure, not particularly to finance it, but at least to organize it in a way where this can be disconnected, built at a scale that is relevant enough to serve multiple projects and bring the overall cost of, for the producers down and make the product competitive. At the end, our experience is that as long as a project is well structured, risk allocation is properly addressed by having multiple partners to deal with the entire chain. It's pretty long from the point of production all the way to the point of actual consumption that may be thousands of kilometers away, and risks is well managed and everything is properly structured. Financing is no object. I mean, we were lucky, we're actually to see that I think there is a lot of money available and running after good projects, and we're actually oversubscribed in our recent projects in terms of financing. So we don't see that really as the main challenge, but for those projects to be attractive, of course, there's a lot of things that need to come together to make them bankable and attractive for the financiers.
So I think the key takeaway from what you're saying there is that it's important that we look at the whole supply chain and make sure that we can make it as successful for financing as possible. And I think you're signing up to perhaps start a working group around this area. It sounds like you have a lot of knowledge and intel on how to make things work properly. So yeah, we should definitely pick up after this. And talking about money, we have Joanne from Industrial Development Corporation. So from your perspective, what offtake support mechanisms and incentives are needed? And what can institutions such as IDC do to support their creation at the national and regional levels, e.g. leveraging the EU-Africa partnership to create a joint hydrogen corridor, for example, between Namibia and South Africa?
Thanks. And I agree with Dries. The access to capital is not the challenge. The access to projects isn't the challenge. The access to bankability is. And what it often comes down to is the need for offtake in order to make the project bankable. And to try and get off-takers to buy into these projects, particularly in the early stages when they're significantly more expensive than we know they're going to be in the next 3 to 5 years, is probably the key challenge, particularly to African countries where financing is at a premium and the governments don't have the access to, or don't have the government resources in order to provide concessions that are available in other markets. From an African perspective, South Africa is one of the founding members of the African Green Hydrogen Alliance, where we're looking at working with the rest of the African countries in order, with a selection of our African countries, in aggregating supply and demand. So how do we start identifying the demand side opportunities on the continent? How do we aggregate supply in order to leverage some of the value chains into the international markets? This then partners and I think relates very nicely to the African-EU partnership, where there is access into the EU of contract for difference opportunities, where those premier can be accessed. And we need as a continent, or as an African continent, to understand how we can leverage the infrastructure and other resources so that we can get early supply into the European markets, leveraging some of these partnerships. From a de-risking perspective, what we know is that the hydrogen is necessary, if I talk to South Africa, not only as an energy supply into Europe or an energy vector, but really for a decarbonization of our local industry. So what we need to start doing is thinking differently about de-risking projects and how we can bring together a number of users of projects in order to create green product for export. So I think a different level of thinking is needed as well as we start thinking about how we can de-risk projects. It's not just a case of how do we produce green hydrogen at a price that an off-taker is willing to buy it, but how do we actually produce green value chains leveraging hydrogen. Ammonia is obviously a critical opportunity within the African continent, considering the agricultural possibilities. So how do we really leverage the use of green products on the continent to decarbonize and expand our local markets as we think about de-risking? From an IDC perspective, we are thinking about how we can bring in partners in order to create a de-risking opportunity. it's quite challenging from a government perspective to look at providing any support. So this is where we need to start thinking about modelling. We often think about decarbon or de-risking from an environmental perspective, but there's a social opportunity and risk of not decarbonising. So how do we model the opportunity cost of not taking the action in order to ensure that the right action can in fact be funded? So I think we need to definitely think about how we model and define risk differently in order to allow that risk to actually be taken to unlock the early vectors in hydrogen.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I noticed the time, so we've probably got one more question, so put your hand up if you want to answer it. But we've witnessed that several major oil companies have announced large-scale investments in green hydrogen projects. How can we bring on board large oil companies and national ones as part of an integrated value chain or energy systems approach in both MENA and sub-Saharan African countries, given that IOCs and NOCs have natural strengths in project management and the balance sheet needed to get projects to FID? So I'm looking at you, but it's open to anyone, given that we've got to hurry up.
I think they are already on board. I mean, there's not a single oil company who doesn't have a hydrogen department or making investments. Although I must say that if I look at last year, that wasn't a good year. Shell basically got out of hydrogen. I mean, they basically fired the entire team. There are still some people, but they're struggling with a fundamental problem that we're currently having, which is very much like what we saw at renewables 15 years ago, is that we see a lot of activity from the private sector. There's of course also activity on the side of the public sector. So there is hydrogen strategies, and you mentioned contracts for difference. There's carbon border adjustment mechanisms. There's renewable energy directives. There's IRAs and all kinds of mechanisms that that are supporting the market development, but in my view, at the moment, there is still something missing. So we're seeing a growing pipeline of projects and potential investments, and not enough final investment decisions. And I do think that this is a point in time when the governments need to, look hard again what it is that they need to do. Because I do think that the private sector has been doing enough. I mean, you see the pipeline growing, initiatives are growing, but there is still something missing. We know, Dries said, there is a cost gap, so we need to overcome that. You either put an obligation in place or a subsidy. Those are the two things that you can do. And I think it's time for that. I think we need to step up as governments and actually make this, something like a feed-in tariff we had for renewables a while back. Something simple, replicable, scalable.
Like it. Joanne, any comments to add to that?
So I think in South Africa we've got Sasol, that is a major petrochemicals company and converting coal to liquids. And one of the challenges we're seeing is with investors. As much as there are oil companies that can can leverage the transition, how do we ensure that investors actually are willing to allow those companies not to maximize dividends, but to actually invest in those vectors? So I think there's work that needs to be done to ensure that the transition and ESG fundamentals of investors actually translate into allowing companies to actively reduce dividends in order to invest in some of these new technologies. So I think that's quite a critical point. What we're seeing is all the investors are saying we need to do ESG, but they're not allowing the fossil fuel companies to make some of those decisions because they're wanting to maximize dividends. And I really think we need to leverage the fossil fuel companies that are good cash producers to actually invest in some of these early stage projects, because to your point, they have the technology, they have the technical skills to actually deploy these projects, so need to be freed up to actually allow their businesses to transition.
Great. And lastly, but not least, Dries.
No, I think that, as Frank said, I think we don't need to bring them in; they're already in. So that's a given. They definitely have capabilities, both technically, commercially, and financially, in order to implement projects and bring them up to speed. Now, in order to address maybe some of the concerns you read, Joe, and I think that some of them are adopting strategies to carve out the business partially outside of the core business, effectively, that and partner with companies that effectively can, where they can leverage those specific capabilities that they don't have, or the nimbleness that they may not have in order to navigate this new world where, I mean, you have like an energy behemoth. It's not always easy to be effectively have the agility to try to jump in on such a new business. So.
Thank you. We've probably got one question that we can take from the audience, but I'll say, please could it be a question and not a teaching? So, oh, hand straight up, there we go. Please introduce yourself.
Masanda from Kaust. My question is, would it be better to use the renewable electricity to decarbonize the power sector? And when it's decarbonized, then generate hydrogen rather than jump to hydrogen now?
Did you catch that?
Yeah, so no, thank you for the question. I think that's a relevant one. I think in places or countries where renewable energy is scarce, I fully agree with you. The first priority should be to decarbonize the power sector. It's a no-brainer. We have, let's say, a pile of primary energy that is like this. Power today is this. We need to bring it to here, 80%, in order to be able to decarbonize whatever and electrify, first electrify and then decarbonize the entire power sector. That's a no-brainer. Now, in areas where there is energy abundance, I don't think we should be asking the question. We see it in Saudi Arabia right now. There is a very aggressive, a very ambitious plan to decarbonize the power sector. Saudi Arabia is on track to reach 50% renewables by 2030, and I think that it's only effectively going to go higher in the near future. But there is enough resources to even look beyond decarbonizing the power sector, no matter how big it becomes, but as well effectively support the decarbonization of the local industry and as well export energy to serve those other places that are energy scarce and support their decarbonization journey as well. So yes, we should be focusing where it's relevant, but I don't think that we should be completely stopping all the hydrogen development, focus on power, and then wake up in 30 years from now and say, oh, now we need to figure out what do we do with those last 20% of our energy sector that needs to be decarbonized.
And if I may have a slightly more nuanced view on it, I won't say I don't agree to the fact that, of course, we need to use electricity directly as much as we can. But the fact is that 20% of final energy use is electricity, 80% are molecules. And we cannot stretch electricity and direct use of electricity much beyond 50%. I mean, that is really where it all stops. I haven't seen any credible scenario where electricity is more than 50% of all final energy. So the rest is still going to be molecules. We cannot have emissions, so we have to do something with cleaning up the molecules. And this is an important aspect that we have to consider. And as Dries said, we cannot wait. You know, first of all, molecules are going to be a massive part, are going to remain the bulk of the energy system of the future as energy carriers. They have to be clean. There's not many alternatives to hydrogen, ammonia, and all of these things without carbon. Of course, we can continue burning carbon, you have to capture. But by and large, I think the bulk of the energy system are molecules, and they have to be clean. That's what hydrogen is. We cannot store electricity. Transport of molecules way more efficient. So apart from the efficiency of direct electrification, there is efficiencies in transport and storage, which is way better for molecules. So I do think we have to have a nuanced view on this, and I think hydrogen, we cannot wait. It has to be done now. It has to be done together with green electrification.
Final comment from you,
Just
Joanne.
one final comment on that. If we look at a country like South Africa, where the transmission grid in the areas of highest wind and solar generation is the most scarce, the main way that communities will be electrified within those provinces will be through excess electrons from the hydrogen projects. So there's a social electrification opportunity that is ancillary to hydrogen production that is not competing with the existing renewable energy or the decarbonization of the electricity grid.
Thank you. Wow, we finished on time. Can we get a round of applause for that, first of all? And for our brilliant panel, thank you, Frank, Joanne, and Dries. It's been a pleasure. We look forward to connecting with you in this huge dome and beyond. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you.